Well, we've got a lot of background to look into with those references you gave us. Thank you. Our next speaker is Sywert Brongersma, who obtained a PhD in superconductivity at the Free University of Amsterdam. After his postdoctorate work at the University of Western Ontario, he joined IMEC's Advanced Silicon Processing Division as a principal scientist. In 2006, he transferred to the Wireless Autonomous Transducer Systems Program for Healthcare Application in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, where he is currently the principal researcher. Would you please come up, and looking forward to your talk.
Let's see if we can get this working. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I was listening to Dr. Najifi a little earlier today, explaining about 20 years of conference experiences. I actually realized when I started thinking about it that my first conference was exactly 20 years ago as well. Coincidentally, right next to a ski resort as well. Only I think I goofed off a little more back then. But so thank you very much. That's probably due to the beautiful program we have here. I'd also like, right off the bat, to thank my co-workers. And as I'll be talking about basically the entire Wireless Autonomous Transducer Systems program, that's basically everyone in the Institute. So I didn't want to list 80 names here. There's a lot of people back home, both in Eindhoven and in our IMEC Belgium site, that contribute to this work. And I'll try to show some of the highlights. I'd like to especially mention the group of Julian Penders, who put together all the little demos that you're going to see in this. Now, if I say demos, that actually already says demonstrators and not products, and that sort of says a little bit about the way we work. So what we are is an open innovation program where we try to get generic research on a variety of different topics together with a number of member companies. So we have companies like TI, Philips, and XP that join us in the research, try to do that together, and they then will try to make the devices in the end. And what we try to do with our demonstrators is actually to show that the underlying technology is good enough to do these sorts of applications and allow each member company to make its own devices and products with that. So the research is actually meant to be very generic so that each company can do its own things with that. And now you see a couple of examples of this. These are actually largely future sketches. Two of these we're actually actively pursuing. One is the smart pill, the smart wrapper here. This is a blister package for patients to improve the what do you call that? The compliance, exactly. So to improve compliance, and there's a lot of these systems out there actually, if you look. But basically, normally they ask something extra from a patient. Here we actually use a layer-to-layer foil system that shouldn't allow or shouldn't ask for anything more of the patient, and everything's embedded in the electronics in the foil. The other one is the smart bandage here, where we're trying to measure bloodstream right underneath the surface with an optical method. So instead of having to remove the bandage every time after, for instance, a severe burn, you actually follow the repair and the healing process and only take it off when it's needed. Now, you also see a couple other completely different things here. So like oil pipelines, we actually look at integrating these systems in buildings, monitoring structural integrity, those sorts of things. Also looking at the food chain, how products get to market and how well they actually still behave once they're in your own fridge. So the work that we're doing is actually not limited to body area networks and persons. We see many applications, and I'll try to focus on the medical side of it today. Now, we actually consist of two parts that you see at the top here. One is the T&O side of this institute, which brought in a system in foil, and I think there was some comments about this earlier, combining silicon-based systems that came from our institute in Belgium, in Leuven, and system in foil, leads to some very powerful new applications, and we're trying to pursue those and show that we can build up the generic technology needed for those. Now, if you look at medical then as a driver, this is sort of our vision and some of the little chips that we're making at the moment. So in the end, we think people will get smaller and smaller devices, as unubiquitous as possible, on their body that monitor a variety of things, from EEGs, ECGs, blood pressures, toxins. So it can be either in the body or outside. And we're trying to look at all the different parts that are needed to be able to enable that. So implantability, in principle, is not something that we normally work on, basically because we think we can show the power of the underlying technology without having to do all the invasive stuff. Although I should mention that there is a smart pill program in Leuven in the IMEX site there. And then we look at functionality, building some intelligence in this, and we've heard the trade-off again before between actually sending data out and trying to do local computation. Connectivity is a big one. Wearability is something that we're actually actively pursuing, trying to integrate these things and make you not notice them. And then autonomy is something that was actually talked about quite a few times today. And most people seem to have the definition of that the device should be able to make its own decision once the right information comes in. For us, because we work on silicon-based systems and we have sensors, actuators, a microprocessor, a radio, autonomy for us also means making enough power to actually run this thing. So it's making enough power to either to generate the data and either send it out or process it, depending on the situation. Now you see a couple of possible ways to use this data then. Everything should basically go out through a central node, like your cell phone. Then there's the direct link to the doctor that we saw beautiful examples of earlier today. In a more extreme case, you could think of a real heart attack where someone's dropping to the floor and your position is already communicated to the ambulance, so he's on his way before he actually hit the ground. So these sort of the applications that we're thinking about here. And power then, of course, you don't want a person to have 100 different wires on their body, so wearability and radio communication is a large part of this. So making enough power is an important thing. This is one of the larger medical applications of portable systems, I think. This actually used to transport medicine through the desert, and the solar panel makes enough power to cool the thing down. We don't want backpacks like this on persons, so we're trying to make this a little smaller. This is actually one where we can generate about 2 milliwatts out of a headband. This looks pretty large, but actually most of this are cooling fans. So the actual thermal piles that are inside are fairly thin. We put the cooling fans on just to see how much power we could actually get out of this in an optimal situation. But you do get about 30 microwatts out of this per cubic centimeter. And actually the main problem with this is that it extracts so much power out of your forehead that it's not convenient to the patient anymore, and he doesn't like to get such a cold head. Another one that we're working on is sort of the wristwatch with sensors built into it. The power that this generates actually depends very much on the environment. I mean, in Alaska, it's going to do a lot more than in southern Florida, probably. Of course, if it gets really hot, it starts working again. It's really only the thermal difference and not so much the absolute temperature. And everything that we scavenge here, our objective is actually make one system where such scavenging systems, so either out of thermal differences, out of solar, out of vibrations, we're looking into all of these, should generate about 100 microwatts locally for the sensor node to collect the data, do the radio, do the microprocessing, do some signal processing, and also do a front-end readout. And all of these get part of the power that we generate. And actually, they all have their own differences. I mean, radio, we heard a little bit how much power that uses. DSP is also a large one. Front-end, when I just started in this field, was very surprising to me for things like an ADC converter. I thought they they existed 20 years ago or even longer. If you ask an electrical engineer to make a 12-bit ADC converter for 10 microwatts, he actually has a significant problem again. So all of these are sort of struggling with their own power requirements, trying to get to this overall 100 microwatt system. So what we do then in our institute is trying to look a little bit at all the 7 different levels that we've identified within one of these sensor nodes. And that's basically everything from the underlying technology, which is MEMS, so we look at getting power out of vibrating beams with large masses on them. We do vertical nanowire FETs, we do microbeams for both stress and mass sensing. We also started a little bit on micro-optics recently because we've done a fairly large analysis and found that even with a budget of only about 20 to 30 microwatts, we could do optical sensing mechanisms. We then look at the physical sensing mechanism that you build on top, signal preconditioning, ADC conversion, and then it goes up to real signal processing in the final application layers. Yep. This was actually mentioned before, but of course, all these things, once you start having sensors that talk to a central node, it has to go outside. It's not just operability, and you could make a system that communicates very well within its own cycle. In the future, when many companies start to make these things, you also want interoperability between all the different systems. So the Continuo Alliance is actually, I think it's more than 160 companies now that work together to define the standards and see how these systems should be talking together and networking. So in the end, the consumer can actually use all of them at the same time and they can talk to each other. So I just wanted to mention that there's actually a good website that describes basically what they're working on. Now to get into a little bit more what we've been doing over the years, what we have at the moment in human health in our Eindhoven site actually came out of IMEC Belgium, where it started in about 2002, and they made this portable EEG with a lot of sensor nodes, little electrodes on this little kid's head. You got a big box running into it, and then a radio that transmits the data out. Over the years, we've gone from that system to something like this, and now we're actually working with something that's about a cubic centimeter. Of course, it's not on your wrist. It's, of course, close to your head where you try to measure EEG signals. But basically, we've taken the form factor down by a factor of 300, and we're now below 10 milliwatts for the entire sensor node, sending out the EEG data. In the end, of course, we do this because we think it'll help detecting epileptic seizures. Here's actually a good example where you see if you have an automated epileptic seizure detection, you can do that typically within about 10 seconds. Okay? If you leave it up to either the patient himself or to a person that's in the surrounding and let them press a button or tell you that something's going on, you see that a lot of these hits are missing, and typically when they do see it, it takes a lot longer. So we're trying to see if we can speed up that process of recognition. If you look at the power consumption of this thing, and these are the real signals that we actually extract now, you actually see that with a system this large, so it's really about a cubic centimeter. For those of you who don't travel to Europe, this is about as big as a quarter. It's worth a little more these days. You see two things. One, it's getting pretty small. The other is that the battery actually is still a large chunk of this whole thing, which means that we're not there yet in producing the micropower scavenging that we'd like to have, and to be able to show the working features of all the other technology, and we still put a large battery underneath. In the end, this will be a combination of a scavenger that will create the power, still with a much smaller battery, because you can never continuously scavenge enough energy. You will always need a battery to locally store some energy that you can use when people suddenly walk into a dark room, or when one of the various scavenging principles suddenly stops working. If you try to get what we have now then, which is about 3.5 milliwatts for a fully functional EEG setup, even further down, we're going to have to work on the radio technology, which takes a fairly large chunk of this still. We're also looking at doing more local processing, so actually finding out the right markers and transmitting only those, which basically means that you need about 500 million operations per milliwatt, because otherwise you might as well send out all the data and do the analysis offline. So it's the trade-off between local signal processing and radio again. In parallel, so this was one of the examples that we have. In parallel, we're trying to set a variety of different sensors, similar nodes, that in the end we'd like to combine for a variety of medical applications. This is an ECG patch, so here you see that we're already gone to some flexible substrates. This still has a standard TI microprocessor, it has a Nordic radio, and we then build in the various software, the radio protocols, all that, and we'll actually hear more about that in the next talk. And in the end, we try to integrate it with little pieces of cloth at this moment, but in the end, of course, should be in T-shirts, baseball bats, whatever you can think of putting this stuff in. And of course, the flexibility is going to help there, and especially the coexistence of our system in foil program, together with the silicon-based IMEC background, we hope will enable these sorts of applications. This actually goes towards arrhythmia detection, so we've actually made a large DSP effort to detect the 3 different peaks here and see where the offsets are, where the peak heights are, get all the significant data, and then had an expert compare and say where we actually should have found them. And you see that we're fairly close to 100% in most cases, a little bit off in some. But we're doing this with only 6 milliwatts per detection, and because it's a fairly quick program, it can run at a duty cycle of only 1%, so the average power consumption here is only 60 microwatts to actually do the full analysis, and we then use the radio to send out only the relevant information. A few more examples that we're trying to do to make a larger platform of multiple sensors. This was actually one of the first, an SpO2, which is just an off-the-shelf SpO2 sensor, at that time still an off-the-shelf thermopile to generate some power. And with our low-power sensor node, we could then use this power to read this and send out the data that was coming out of this to a laptop that was close to there. And then for the more flexible things, we're starting to look at things, simple things like body temperature to combine, because it's always very important for calibrating all the other systems as well. Now, as I said, in the end, a multi-sensor approach is always going to be much more powerful if you're trying to look at more complicated systems, like a person. So we're trying to now to combine SpO2, muscles, ocular and EEGs, ECGs, and temperatures into one thing. Not just for medical, also for monitoring athletes, looking at structures, all sorts of different applications. And here's a good example of that. So this is a system where we combine 2-channel EEGs, 2-channel ocular, and 1-channel muscular for the jaw movement. And this is actually trying to make a sleep monitor. And of course, when you have more sensors, you need some sort of protocol in the radio that you can read all of them. But in the end, you see that this is actually a pretty important issue. If you look at sleep apnea, in Europe, 4% of males is suffering from this. Females, for some reason, a little bit less. I don't know why that is. In the US, it's actually much larger than in Europe. Obesity seems to have something to do with that. This has quite significant consequences for people going to work, having bad nights of sleep. And typically, the current sleep monitoring systems are fairly expensive. They're all wired up in hospitals. They need to measure all these different things. And if you could do this in your own home environment, have your normal night's sleep and analyze the data, of course, that would be a much nicer situation. And we've actually compared this now in several hospital trials where we compare the actual reference system used in the hospital with our system at the same time, where you see the up active REM sleeps and the distribution over the different stages, I think comes pretty close. We're actually coming fairly close to being able to monitor these things. Only here we're doing it with a few milliwatts instead of a large hospital system. One of the final things that I'd like to show is something we got in recently. So we're actually trying to see if we can do some emotions monitoring and see how people behave in different circumstances. So for that, we're targeting the two neural systems and the vocal system. We're trying to put different sensors to actually see how they relate to different emotions and if we can find some correlations there. Of course, these do not only respond to emotions, and they're a very complex mix of many influences on these, and we're trying to extract whether we can separate those. And we think a low-power wireless sensor system is possibly a good application, possibly a good way to do this. And the top here, you actually see our little test environment. So we measure a couple of things on this person, and he's looking at things on the screen, and we're trying to make him cry and scared and whatever else. Yeah. You can think of a bunch of applications for this, but the first is actually where you have a direct feed loop back to the patient itself. So you could think of, actually also in the gaming industry, there's a lot of attention for this, just people playing a game, seeing something on the screen and reacting to it, and the game being able to interact with that. You could also think of people that are taking drugs for depressions, for instance, and have an early warning system when they start to be depressed, and they actually, by realizing themselves what's going on, they could take an extra dose or talk to their doctor or go back to that. This is a fairly simple loop, and of course the much more complicated one that was talked about a little bit before is this one, where we're actually monitoring acceptance of drug treatment. We're giving feedback back to the doctor, and immediately then start getting into a lot of protocols, how you have to handle the information flow in terms of security, also patient privacy, who can see this information, how do you have to encode it. So this is a much more complicated loop, but we've started some initial trials on this, just measuring a bunch of different sensors and trying to correlate to these different emotions. And from a first Fisher mapping, we see an error rate of about 40% for 3 of these. A couple of them are just inseparable. For 3 of them, we see a 40% error rate. Of course, if you just guess, you would be at 66%. So it's about a 26% improvement. But it's very early in this survey, I think, and there's a lot of fitting going on here, and the next batch of data should actually tell whether the fitting protocols that we've developed here are going to be reasonable and applicable. So to finish off, let me just say what the trends are for what we're doing in the future. We do hope to go to really fully unobtrusive monitoring solutions, so really a lot of small patches that interact wirelessly together without having too many wires on the system, each with about this 100 microwatt sort of power level, which of course depends on where you need to put it, because you can scavenge different amounts in different areas. So power scavenging is one big program. For the sensing, we're actually looking at a wide range of things to add to this platform that we have now. So for sweat, saliva, and breath, we're starting some activities, but also for a variety of gas molecules. So that's not just stuff that comes out of the patient, but also what's in the environment. If you're in different environments, patient might react to that differently. So you see things like polarized dipole molecules, which we, for instance, try to do with nanowire vertical FETs that we functionalize 2 different molecules, both with silicon and 3,5 materials. Redox and volatile measurements, we do, for instance, microbeams. We use 2-dimensional electron gases. We're actually screening a wide range of technology options, trying to see which is the best options for these different molecules that behave in several different classes of ways that you could attack them. And then, of course, the readout circuitry is a large one. The radio and DSP are all going to continue getting this power down to the level where we can actually start using the real power scavenging that we're doing. So with that, I come to the end of what I'd like to tell you. Thank you.